Imagine a country once written off as one of the poorest on Earth, where only 1 in 5 homes had electricity, where broken roads cut off villages from schools and markets, and where young people believed their dreams would have to be chased abroad. Now picture that same country, Burkina Faso, standing before the world and declaring something unthinkable. We will build Africa's first nuclear power plant, our own national gold refinery, a vast network of 50,000 kilometers of roads, and even launch our own satellite into space. September 15th, 2025 was not just another date on the calendar. It was the day President Ibrahim Traoré unveiled what many now call the most ambitious national development plan in modern African history. 10 megaprojects worth billions of dollars, ranging from advanced hospitals to electric vehicle factories projects that could turn this landlocked nation into an industrial hub for the entire continent. But here's the question: can one young leader, often dismissed in the West as just another military ruler, truly achieve in 3 short years what generations of governments failed to deliver in decades? Or are we witnessing a turning point in African history where the impossible begins to look inevitable? For Americans watching, especially those of you who lived through moments when leaders promised big but delivered little, this story may feel like déjà vu. Yet there is something different here. These are not empty pledges or speeches written for applause. These are contracts signed, foundations poured, jobs already being created, and communities already beginning to feel the change. So stay with us, because in this video we will walk through each of the 10 mega projects one by one: nuclear power, gold sovereignty, aviation, health, water technology, and more. And by the end, you may find yourself asking, could Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré become the model for a new kind of African future? Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness this transformation. And subscribe if you believe that truth matters more than the headlines. When President Ibrahim Traoré stepped to the podium on September 15, 2025, he did not speak in vague terms about development. He came with a blueprint, a list of 10 concrete projects already underway. For the people of Burkina Faso, long accustomed to broken promises, this was a shock. For observers abroad, it was a revelation. The first and most audacious project was the Burkina Faso nuclear power plant, announced in partnership with Russia's Rosatom. For decades only, the world's most industrialized nations had dared to step into nuclear energy. Yet here was Burkina Faso, a country where only 21% of homes had access to electricity, declaring it would be the pioneer of Africa's first indigenously controlled nuclear program. The plan was bold: a 5-year construction timeline for the first unit, complete energy independence for Burkina Faso and its Sahel neighbors, and a sweeping transfer of technology and training. Traoré had already established the Burkina Atomic Energy Agency the year before, laying the institutional foundation. To many in the West, it sounded impossible. To Burkina citizens living in darkness, it sounded like hope. Closely tied to this was Project 2, the National Gold Refinery Complex. For decades, Burkina Faso dug its gold from the ground, only to ship raw ore abroad for refinement, losing billions in potential revenue. On July 9, 2025, Traoré broke ground on a refinery capable of processing 400 kilograms daily, 150 tons a year. For the first time, the wealth of the land would stay in the land. The facility promised 100 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect ones, and more importantly, a secure national vault to store gold reserves. Guarded by a 24/7 anti-extraction task force, the site was more than a factory. It was a statement. Only the wealth of our land should build what will protect that wealth. Then came Project 3, the Sisino Mega Cement Factory, inaugurated in March 2025 with Chinese technical backing. Producing 2,000 tons of cement daily, 750,000 tons annually. This factory was designed not only to meet domestic demand but to serve the construction needs of the Alliance of Sahel states. Traoré called it sustainable endogenous development. With plans for expansion to 1.2 million tons a year, the project aimed to end dependence on costly imports and provide materials for every bridge, school, and home his nation would build. But what good are cement and steel if they cannot reach the people? That is why Project 4, the 50,000-kilometer road network, struck such a deep chord. From 2025 to 2029, over 900 Burkina-operated machines would carve new lifelines across the nation. Highways to connect Ouagadougou with Bobo-Dioulasso, rural roads to link farmers with markets, and cross-border trade routes to tie the Sahel Confederation together. Unlike past projects managed by foreign contractors, this was to be built entirely by local engineers and workers. Infrastructure built by Burkina for Burkina Traoré said, villages once isolated would now see clinics, schools, and markets within reach. Project 5, the Donson International Airport. With a price tag of $200 million, this was more than an airport. It was a symbol of connection for a landlocked nation. A 4,000-meter runway capable of handling the world's largest aircraft, modern terminals, and expanded cargo facilities would turn Burkina Faso into a regional hub. For investors, it meant access. For tourists, it meant arrival. For traders, it meant lower costs. And for Traoré's vision, it meant independence from Western-controlled aviation networks. Direct flights to Russia, China, and the Middle East were already on the horizon. Together, these first 5 projects painted a picture of transformation. Energy, independence, resource, sovereignty, industrial strength, national connectivity, and global access. For a country once mocked as least developed, the vision was staggering. But Traoré was not offering dreams. These were contracts signed, bulldozers already moving, foundations already poured. The message was clear: Burkina Faso would no longer wait for development to be handed down from abroad. It would build its own future with its own hands. If the first 5 projects stunned the world, the next wave of announcements pushed Burkina Faso's transformation into a realm no one expected. These were not only about industry and roads, but about the very fabric of life, health, water, technology, and memory. Project 6, the Bobo Dioulasso University Hospital. In a region where families often traveled across borders just to find basic medical care, Traoré promised something unprecedented: West Africa's most advanced teaching hospital. Not just a place for patients, but a center for medical education, research, and innovation. Equipped with modern technology and partnerships with Russian and Chinese institutions, it would train African doctors on African soil. For elders who had watched their children die from treatable diseases, the announcement was more than infrastructure, it was salvation. For the younger generation, it meant they would no longer need to leave the continent to study medicine. Project 7. The Ziga 2 Water Project. For the capital city of Ouagadougou, water scarcity had become a silent crisis. The original Ziga Dam could no longer sustain a growing urban population. Traoré unveiled a massive expansion: new pipelines, treatment plants, and storage capable of supplying 135,000 cubic meters daily clean water for over 1 million people. He framed it not only as public health, but as a foundation for industrial growth and urban expansion. For ordinary Burkina women who had carried buckets for miles under the sun, this was liberation in its purest form. Then came the project that captured global imagination, Project 8, domestic electric vehicle production. In a country that imports nearly all its fuel, the idea of manufacturing electric cars seemed far-fetched, yet factories were already being prepared. Integrated with solar power projects, Burkina Faso would roll out a new line of affordable electric vehicles, reducing dependence on foreign oil and creating a new industrial base. For the West, long preaching about green transitions, it was a wake-up call. For Burkina youth, it was a signal that they could be producers of technology, not just consumers. Project 9, Burkina Sat 1. No one expected a landlocked country long dismissed as underdeveloped to enter the space race. But Traoré announced the nation's first satellite program dedicated to telecommunications, agriculture, and disaster management. The satellite would provide independent data for weather patterns, crop monitoring, and emergency response. Why should Africa always rent its eyes from others? Traoré asked. This project was not only about science, it was about sovereignty over information, about controlling the skies above one's own land. Finally, the emotional heart of the entire program, Project 10, the Sankara Mausoleum, a sweeping memorial to Burkina Faso's revolutionary founder Thomas Sankara and his 12 fallen companions. A museum, an educational center, a cultural venue, all designed to honor the man who once preached self-reliance and Pan-African unity. For Traoré, it was not just about bricks and stone. It was about binding the past to the present, proving that the revolution's torch still burns. For the crowds gathered that September, many in tears, it was the most powerful moment of the day. The climax of Traoré's announcement was not just in the scale of each project, but in the way they fit together like pieces of a larger puzzle. Nuclear power would fuel the factories, gold revenues would fund the roads would connect to the airport would support trade, the hospital would heal the workers, the water project would sustain the city, the satellite would guide agriculture. And the mausoleum would remind every citizen of the values driving this transformation. Reactions poured in. Across Africa, youth leaders hailed Traore as proof that vision and courage could achieve the impossible. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered in celebration, waving flags and chanting his name. Regional allies in the Sahel Confederation praised the projects as a blueprint for sovereignty. But in Western capitals, the silence was telling. Commentators on European television dismissed the announcements as overambitious, while American think tanks quietly warned that such rapid development outside Western oversight could destabilize traditional partnerships. For the people of Burkina Faso, however, the message was clear. Their nation had crossed a threshold. The projects were not promises, they were realities under construction. And for the first time in generations, hope was not a word whispered but a road being paved, a hospital being built, a satellite being prepared for launch. The unveiling of 10 megaprojects was not just about steel, concrete, and technology. It was about how these projects would reshape the daily lives of millions and the political order of a nation long treated as a pawn on the global chessboard. On the civilian front, the changes were immediate. Thousands of young men and women found jobs on construction sites, laying roads, welding beams, pouring foundations. For decades, unemployment had been a quiet killer of hope. Now families could see a paycheck at the end of the month, food on the table, and children sent to school without fear of fees unpaid. The ripple effects spread quickly. Local markets bustled with new demand. Artisans and small shopkeepers found customers again, and villages once disconnected by dirt tracks now watched as graders and bulldozers carved modern roads through their fields. The health revolution promised by the Bobo Dioulasso University Hospital carried deep political meaning. No longer would Burkinabe citizens feel abandoned when illness struck. Instead of scraping together money to send a relative abroad for treatment, families could look to their own soil for care. For the political class, this was a major break from the past, a government that healed rather than neglected. In a society where legitimacy had often been fragile, the hospital became a symbol that authority could be grounded in service, not in force. Water, too, had its political consequences. The Ziga 2 project was not simply about quenching thirst, it was about dignity. Clean water meant healthier children, fewer disease outbreaks, and the ability for women to redirect hours of their day from hauling buckets to educating their daughters or tending their businesses. A government that delivered water was a government that proved itself worthy of trust. The gold refinery carried perhaps the sharpest political edge. For decades, Burkina Faso's gold wealth had flowed outward, enriching foreign refineries and investors. By keeping that wealth at home, Traoré redefined sovereignty in material terms. Billions in revenue now captured domestically could finance schools, roads, and hospitals, but it also meant confrontation with powerful interests abroad. Whispers of sabotage and espionage began to circulate, prompting Traoré to deploy round-the-clock security at the refinery. In the minds of ordinary Burkinabe, the refinery was not just an economic site, it was a fortress protecting their future from foreign hands. Politically, the projects forged a new social contract. Instead of promises written on paper, Burkinabe citizens could see tangible results: highways stretching across the horizon, cranes lifting steel at the airport, water flowing into new neighborhoods. In village meetings and city cafes, conversations shifted from despair to cautious pride. The state is present, people said. And for a leader who had risen from the military, often accused of being just another strongman, this physical evidence of progress became his greatest defense against critics. At the same time, the projects carried risks. With such rapid transformation, expectations soared. If deadlines were missed or corruption crept in, the backlash could be fierce. Yet Traoré's emphasis on transparency, publicly announcing project timelines, budgets, and job creation numbers, helped build a sense of shared ownership. These were not his projects alone. They were the nation's projects. The most profound consequence, however, was psychological. For decades, Burkinabe citizens had been told they were too poor, too weak, too dependent to dream of nuclear power, electric cars, or satellites. Now, in classrooms and community halls, children spoke with pride about becoming engineers, doctors, or space scientists. National identity, once fragile, began to harden around a new belief that Burkina Faso was capable of building its own destiny. And in politics, that belief is power. It legitimizes governments, strengthens sovereignty, and binds citizens together in ways that no constitution alone can achieve. Ibrahim Traoré's projects, then, were not just construction sites. They were the foundations of a new civic spirit and a new political order, one in which authority rests not on fear, but on the promise and delivery of transformation. As Burkina Faso's bulldozers roared and its cranes lifted steel into the sky, the world watched carefully. For allies in Africa, the projects were nothing less than inspirational. For the United States and Europe, they were unsettling evidence that the traditional levers of influence were slipping away. Across the African continent, governments and citizens alike reacted with awe. In Mali and Niger, fellow members of the Sahel Confederation, leaders, praised Traoré's vision as a template for sovereignty. Youth movements in Ghana and Nigeria began circulating images of Burkina Faso's gold refinery and new hospital, demanding that their own governments follow suit. If landlocked Burkina Faso can build satellites, why not us, they asked. For the first time in decades, the model for African progress was not imported from Washington, Paris, or Beijing. It was coming from Ouagadougou. But in Western capitals, the tone was different. Analysts in Washington, D.C. quietly expressed concern that a nuclear partnership with Russia represented not only an energy project, but a geopolitical shift. The U.S. State Department avoided public condemnation, yet think tanks warned that an independent Burkina Faso might inspire others to reject the International Monetary Fund's terms, to nationalize their resources, and to align with non-Western powers. For American policymakers who had long viewed Africa as a field for aid rather than autonomy, Traoré's projects were a strategic puzzle. European reaction was sharper. French media described the program as overambitious, hinting that it would collapse under its own weight. But behind the criticism was unease. France, once Burkina Faso's colonial ruler, had lost nearly all influence in just 3 years. Where French companies once dominated mining and construction, now Burkinabe engineers and Asian partners stood in their place. The symbolism was powerful. The post-colonial order was unraveling before their eyes. China and Russia, by contrast, embraced the developments. Moscow framed the nuclear project as proof of a multipolar world, one where Africa could leap directly into advanced technology without Western permission. Beijing highlighted the cement factory and hospital as evidence of practical South-South cooperation. Yet both countries walked a careful line, knowing that Traoré's rhetoric was not about replacing one master with another, but about true independence. Partnership, not dependence, he often repeated. For the United States, the question is not only strategic but moral. Older Americans watching these developments may remember a time when their own country embarked on bold infrastructure projects: the Hoover Dam, the interstate highways, the Apollo missions. Today, many see a nation consumed by partisan battles and shrinking ambition. To witness a young African leader declare, "We will build our own nuclear plant. We will refine our own gold. We will launch our own satellite," can feel both inspiring and unsettling. The broader implication is clear. If a small resource-challenged nation can achieve this level of transformation in 3 years, then Africa is no longer the developing continent. It is becoming the proving ground for new models of growth and sovereignty. And for Washington, the challenge is whether to continue treating Africa as a recipient of lectures and loans, or to acknowledge it as an emerging partner shaping the 21st century. One thing is certain: the world cannot look away. Whether praised as visionary or dismissed as reckless, Traoré has forced Africa back into the center of global debate. For Americans, especially those who lived through the Cold War, this moment feels familiar: a young leader defying global norms, daring to chart his own path, and in doing so reshaping alliances. The difference is that this time the story is unfolding not in Europe or Asia, but in Africa, and it may define the decades to come. Burkina Faso's 10 megaprojects are not just concrete and steel. They are the physical proof of a vision that Africa can rise on its own terms without asking permission, without waiting for charity, without bowing to foreign dictates. Nuclear power for energy independence, a gold refinery to keep wealth at home, roads and airports to connect a landlocked nation to the world, hospitals and water systems to restore dignity, satellites to control the skies, a mausoleum to honor the past while building the future. But with every bold step comes a warning. The history of Africa is filled with leaders who dared too much and paid the price. From Patrice Lumumba to Thomas Sankara, the world remembers how foreign interference can silence even the strongest voices. Traoré's projects threaten not only economic patterns, but geopolitical control. Billions once flowing outward are now being kept inside Burkina Faso. And when wealth shifts, power shifts. That makes enemies. For ordinary Americans, watching the lesson is sobering. We know what it means when leaders stop building, when infrastructure crumbles, when promises replace action. And we also know what it means when ambition is punished by outside forces. The question now is whether the world will allow Burkina Faso to complete its transformation or whether the familiar hand of sabotage will strike again. The implications reach far beyond one country. If Burkina Faso succeeds, it will set a precedent for every resource-rich African nation to demand more, to build more, to keep more. It could inspire a domino effect across the continent, undermining the very system that has kept Africa tied down for centuries. If it fails, the message will be clear: independence is a dream too dangerous to pursue. So let me ask you, do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective yet? Can he continue this race against time, or should the torch of leadership eventually pass to someone else? And most importantly, will the world stand by while Africa finally builds for itself, or will history repeat itself once again? Please share this video if you feel you are one of the first to witness and support President Ibrahim Traoré's bold transformation. Comment below if you believe Africa's rise is unstoppable, or if you fear the backlash could undo it all. And subscribe to this channel if you believe that the truth, unfiltered, raw, and real, is more important than the headlines. Because in the end, what we are witnessing in Burkina Faso is not just development. It is a struggle for sovereignty, for dignity, and for the right of a people to decide their own future. And that struggle concerns not only Africa, but all of us.